At 76 and 74, Walt and Ida Purcell were the kind of couple the world forgets to count. They didn't own anything impressive. They didn't earn anything remarkable. They moved through their small town of Crandall, Ohio, the way weather moves through a valley, always there, never noticed, touching everything, without being credited for any of it. Walt had been a plumber for 48 years. Ida had been a school lunch cook for 31. Between them, they had fixed every leaking pipe and fed every hungry child in a 20-mile radius, and neither of those things had made them wealthy or famous, or even, apparently, worth keeping around. The letter from Sunrise Meadows. Assisted living arrived on a Monday in January. It was addressed to both of them, which was strange, because Walt and Ida hadn't applied to Sunrise Meadows. They hadn't applied anywhere. The letter was printed on heavy cream-colored paper with a gold logo at the top, the kind of stationery that costs more per sheet than Ida used to spend on a week's worth of school lunch ingredients. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Purcell," it began, "we are pleased to confirm your reservation for a 2-bedroom unit at Sunrise Meadows Senior Living Community, beginning February 15th. Your monthly rate of $5,800 per unit, $11,600 total for a couple's arrangement, has been guaranteed for the first 12 months. We look forward to welcoming you to our community." Ida read the letter twice. Then she handed it to Walt, who read it once, folded it, set it on the kitchen table, and said the thing that Ida was already thinking. Which one of them did this? The answer was all of them. Their 3 children, Gary, 52, Sandra, 49, and Kevin, 45, had been planning this for over a year. Not secretly, exactly, but in the particular way adult children plan things for their parents, in group texts and conference calls and shared Google documents that the parents are never invited to see. They'd toured the facility. They'd negotiated the rate. They'd put down a $3,000 deposit using money from Walt's own savings account, which Gary had access to as a co-signer, a privilege Walt had granted 15 years ago during a hospital stay so someone could pay his bills. Gary had never removed himself from the account. He'd simply waited until the access was useful. "It's the right thing, Dad," Gary said on the phone that evening, using the same tone he used when explaining things to his own children, patient and slow, as if Walt's age had somehow affected his ability to process English. "The house is falling apart. Mom's hip is getting worse. You can't keep up with the yard, the repairs, the groceries. This is the responsible move." "We didn't ask for this," Walt said. "That's kind of the point, Dad. You two would never ask for anything, so we made the decision for you." Sandra called next. She lived in Columbus, 90 minutes away, and visited 4 times a year, always on holidays, always with a gift, and never with time. "Daddy, the house on Birch Street isn't safe anymore. Kevin had a contractor look at it. The foundation has cracks. The roof needs $18,000. The furnace is 22 years old. It's not sustainable." That word again, sustainable. The word children use when they've decided their parents' lives have become inconvenient. The word that really means, we don't want the phone call at 3 a.m. telling us something happened and we weren't there. Kevin didn't call. Kevin sent a text. "Hey, Dad, talk to Gary and Sandra. Sunrise Meadows is great. You'll love it. Let us know if you need help packing." Ida sat at the kitchen table in the house on Birch Street and looked at her hands, the hands that had served 4,200 school lunches a year for 31 years, the hands that had made Thanksgiving dinner for 15 people every November without missing a year, the hands that had held 3 babies and raised 3 children and been squeezed by Walt every single night for 53 years before they fell asleep. "I'm not going," she said. "I know," Walt said. "What are we going to do?" Walt looked out the kitchen window. It was January in Ohio, flat and gray and frozen, the kind of landscape that has nothing to recommend it except the people who stay. Across the street, on the corner of Birch and Main, sat Station Number 4, the old Crandall firehouse. It had been closed since 2019, when the county consolidated fire services and moved everything to the new facility on the highway. Station Number 4 had been sitting empty for 5 years, a 2-story brick building with a 3-bay garage on the ground floor and a living quarters upstairs that had once housed a crew of 6, complete with a kitchen, a bathroom with showers, a common room, and a bunk room big enough for 10 cots. The county had tried to sell it twice. Both times, no buyers. The building was on the historic register, which meant you couldn't tear it down, and the renovation costs scared off developers. The listing price had dropped from $220,000 to $140,000 to $85,000. It was now listed at $62,000, a price that reflected not the value of the building, but the county's exhaustion at owning it. Walt had been looking at that building every day for 5 years, every morning over coffee, every evening from the porch. He knew the dimensions of the garage bays by sight, 14 feet wide, 40 feet deep, tall enough to park a ladder truck. He knew the brickwork was solid because he could see the mortar joints from his kitchen window, clean and tight, the work of masons who built things to last. He knew the upstairs windows were intact because the Historical Commission had replaced them in 2017, 2 years before the station closed. He knew what a plumber knows about buildings, which is everything that matters and nothing that shows. "Ida," he said, "how much do we have in savings?" "After what Gary took for the deposit, 61,000 and some change." Walt looked at the fire station. Then he looked at his wife. "I think I found our next home." If you've ever been told that the best years of your life are behind you, if you've ever been managed by people who couldn't manage themselves, if you've ever looked at something abandoned and seen possibility where everyone else saw failure, then what Walt and Ida did next is going to make you believe that the most dangerous thing in the world is an elderly couple with a plan and nothing left to lose. Welcome to Hearts Don't Rust. Subscribe now, because what these two built inside that abandoned fire station didn't just save their lives, it saved an entire town. Walt Purcell was born in Crandall, Ohio, in 1950. His father, Eugene Purcell, was a plumber. His grandfather, Francis Purcell, was a plumber. His great-grandfather, Thomas Purcell, had been the first licensed plumber in Morrow County. The Purcells had been fixing pipes in central Ohio since indoor plumbing arrived, and they approached the craft with the seriousness of surgeons and the stubbornness of mules. Walt started working with Eugene at 14, crawling under houses in the summer, learning to sweat copper joints and thread galvanized pipe and read the flow of water the way other people read books. He got his journeyman's license at 19 and his master's at 24. He worked for his father until Eugene retired in 1988, then ran Purcell Plumbing alone for another 30 years. He was good, not flashy, not expensive, not the kind of plumber who shows up in a new truck with a logo and charges $150 just to walk through the door. Walt drove a 1998 Chevy van, charged $45 an hour, showed up when he said he would, and fixed things right the first time. He knew every pipe in every house in Crandall because he'd installed or repaired most of them personally. When a toilet ran at 2 o'clock in the morning, people called Walt. When a water heater burst on Christmas Eve, people called Walt. When the elementary school's boiler failed during a cold snap in February, and 400 children were at risk of sitting in a freezing building, the principal called Walt, who drove over in his pajamas and had heat running in 45 minutes. Nobody called Walt when it was time to decide his future. That call went to his children. Ida Purcell, born Ida Brennan, arrived in Crandall in 1974 when she married Walt. She was from Marion, 40 minutes east, the daughter of a farmer and a woman who believed that the best measure of a person was how they fed people. Ida carried that belief into the Crandall Elementary cafeteria in 1985, when she was hired as a lunch cook at $6.50 an hour, and she carried it for 31 years until she retired in 2016. In those 31 years, Ida served approximately 130,000 school lunches. She learned the names of every child who came through her line. She learned which ones had allergies, which ones were vegetarian, which ones were on free lunch because their families couldn't afford the $2.50. She learned which ones came to school hungry because lunch was the only real meal they'd get that day. And for those children, Ida did something she never told the administration about. She packed extra. A dinner roll wrapped in a napkin slipped into a backpack. A container of soup tucked into a lunch bag with a note that said, "Thought you might like seconds." An apple placed in a coat pocket, quietly, consistently, for 31 years. When Ida retired, 47 former students came to her retirement party. Several of them cried. One of them, a woman named Angela Reeves, who was now a pediatrician in Columbus, stood up and said, "Mrs. Purcell is the reason I survived 4th grade. She's the reason a lot of us survived." Ida had gone home after the party and cried in the bathroom because she hadn't known. She hadn't known that the rolls and the soup containers and the apples had mattered that much. She'd just been doing what her mother had taught her. If someone's hungry, you feed them. You don't make a speech about it. You just feed them. Walt and Ida married in 1974 and had 3 children by 1981. They raised them in the house on Birch Street, a 1,200-square-foot bungalow Walt had bought for $28,000 in 1976. He'd replumbed it himself, rewired it with help from his cousin Eddie, who was an electrician, replaced the roof twice, added a screened porch in 1990, and maintained it with the attentiveness of a man who understands that a house is a living thing that rewards care and punishes neglect. Gary, the oldest, got an accounting degree and moved to Dayton. Sandra got a nursing degree and moved to Columbus. Kevin got a business degree and moved to Cincinnati. All 3 of them had jobs that paid more in a month than Walt earned in 3, and none of them could fix a leaking faucet. Stay with me on this one because what Walt and Ida did with that fire station and how the people who laughed at them ended up needing them more than ever is a story that'll stay with you long after it's over. The county auction for Station Number 4 was held on February 1st. The listing price was $62,000. Walt arrived with a cashier's check for $58,500, which was every dollar of their savings minus what they'd need for 2 months of groceries and medications. He also carried a 3-page letter he'd written to the county commissioners, explaining his plans for the building. He didn't need the letter. Nobody else bid. The auctioneer, a tired man named Phil, who'd been trying to unload the building for 3 years, looked at Walt's check, looked at the empty room, and said, "Sold. Congratulations. Please take it." Gary found out 2 days later when he called to discuss the Sunrise Meadows move-in date, and Walt told him they weren't moving to Sunrise Meadows. They were moving to station number 4. The silence on the phone lasted 11 seconds. Walt counted. "A fire station," Gary said finally. "You bought a fire station." "An abandoned fire station?" "Yes." "Dad, that building has been empty for 5 years. It's a commercial structure. It's not zoned residential. You can't just live in a fire station." "I talked to the county. They'll grant a mixed-use variance. They're thrilled someone bought it. And the upstairs was always residential. It was living quarters for the crew. Kitchen, bathroom, beds. All it needs is some work." "Some work? Dad, you're 76. "I'm a plumber, Gary. I've been doing work since I was 14. I'm not dead yet, and I'd appreciate it if you stopped planning my funeral." Sandra called next. "This is insane. You spent your entire savings on a building you can't live in." Kevin texted, "Dad, seriously." The town of Crandall was similarly unimpressed. Crandall had a population of 4,100 and the social infrastructure of a much smaller place, meaning everyone knew everyone's business and had opinions about it before breakfast. The news that 76-year-old Walt Purcell and his 74-year-old wife had bought the old firehouse and planned to live in it traveled through town in approximately 4 hours. At Dottie's Diner on Main Street, the reactions ranged from concerned to cruel. "He's lost his mind," said Frank Teller, who owned the hardware store. "That building needs $100,000 in work. He paid $58,000 for a money pit." "She's going to fall down those stairs and break her other hip," said a woman, whose name Walt didn't know, but whose bathroom he'd replumbed in 2014. "They'll be back at the nursing home by March," said someone else. "Bet you $10. Walt heard all of it. Small towns don't have walls, and Dottie's Diner was approximately 200 feet from station number 4. He heard it, and he let it fuel him, because Walt Purcell had spent 48 years crawling under houses while people stood above him, making conversation about things that didn't matter. And he'd learned that the best response to doubt is a pipe that doesn't leak. On February 10th, 5 days before the Sunrise Meadows reservation was set to begin, Walt and Ida moved out of Birch Street and into station number 4. They loaded Walt's van with clothes, bedding, kitchen supplies, tools, and Ida's cast-iron cookware, which she'd been cooking with for 40 years, and would sooner leave a child behind than a Dutch oven. They drove 300 feet across the intersection and parked in Bay, one of the 3-bay garage. The building was exactly as fire departments leave buildings when they consolidate, stripped of equipment, but structurally sound. The 3 garage bays were vast, concrete-floored, with 14-foot ceilings and massive rolling doors. The apparatus floor had drains, hose bibs, and enough electrical outlets to power a small factory. A steel staircase led from the garage to the second floor, where the crew quarters waited. The upstairs was rough, not condemned, not dangerous, but rough in the way buildings get when nobody has turned on a faucet or lit a pilot light in 5 years. The kitchen had commercial-grade appliances that still worked but were filmed with grease and dust. The bathroom had 2 shower stalls, 3 sinks, and 2 toilets, all of which Walt inspected with professional eyes and pronounced salvageable with about $400 in parts. The common room was large, maybe 30 by 20 feet, with tall windows that looked out over Main Street. The bunk room was even larger, designed to sleep 10 firefighters with enough space for Walt and Ida to create a proper bedroom, a sitting area, and still have room left over. The first night was cold. The heating system, a forced air unit on the roof, had been winterized and drained, and Walt couldn't restart it until he'd inspected every inch of ductwork and replaced the filters and checked the gas connections. They slept in sleeping bags in the bunk room, wearing 3 layers each, Ida's head on Walt's shoulder and his arm around her, the way they'd slept since 1974. "It's quiet," Ida said. "It's ours," Walt said. "Everyone thinks we're crazy." "Everyone thought indoor plumbing was crazy once. My great-grandfather told me that. People laughed at the idea of water coming into your house through pipes, said it was unnatural. Now they can't live without it." Ida smiled in the dark. "Are you comparing us to indoor plumbing?" "I'm comparing us to something people didn't believe in until they needed it. If you're enjoying this story, by the way, consider subscribing. We share stories just like this one every week, about people who were doubted, dismissed, and underestimated, and then proved the entire world wrong. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. The renovation of Station Number 4 became Walt Purcell's masterpiece. 48 years of plumbing had taught him everything a person needs to know about buildings: how water moves, how heat transfers, how air circulates, where failure begins, and how to prevent it. He'd spent his career inside other people's walls. Now, for the first time, the walls were his. He started with the plumbing, because that's what he knew best. He replaced every supply line and drain line in the building, using PEX tubing he bought at cost from the supply house in Mount Gilead, where he'd had an account for 30 years. The existing copper was corroded, but the cast-iron drain stacks were sound, built in 1952, with the same over-engineered thoroughness that characterized everything from that era. He installed a new water heater, a high-efficiency tankless unit that cost $1,200 but would save them $60 a month in gas. He rebuilt the 3 shower stalls, reglazed the sinks, replaced the toilet internals. Total plumbing cost, $3,800 in materials. Labor, $0. Walt Purcell did not pay other people to do what he could do better himself. The heating system took a week. Walt inspected the rooftop unit, diagnosed a failed ignition module and 2 cracked heat exchangers, sourced the parts from a commercial HVAC supplier in Columbus for $640, and made the repairs himself on a February morning, so cold that his wrench froze to the access panel. By February 18th, the building had heat. Real heat, the kind that pours through floor registers and fills a room like a warm bath. Ida stood over the vent in the common room and closed her eyes and said, "Walter Purcell, you beautiful man." The kitchen came next. The commercial appliances, a 6-burner gas range, a double oven, and a 3-compartment sink, were industrial quality from 2008, barely used by the fire crew who'd mostly ordered pizza. Ida cleaned them with the methodical intensity of a woman who had run a school cafeteria for 31 years. She degreased the range. She scoured the ovens. She polished the stainless steel until it reflected light like mirrors. When she turned on the burners for the first time, and the blue flames appeared in a perfect ring, she placed her cast-iron skillet on the grate and made Walt an omelet at 10 o'clock at night, just because she could. Walt built their bedroom in the bunk room. He framed a partition wall, insulated it, drywalled it, and painted it the pale blue that Ida had wanted in every house they'd lived in and never gotten, because there was always something more important to spend the paint money on. He built a closet with cedar shelving. He installed lighting on a dimmer switch. He laid carpet remnants he'd gotten free from a flooring store in Mansfield that was remodeling. The common room became their living room. Walt refinished the old hardwood floor, which had been hidden under industrial carpet tiles. Underneath was oak, scarred and stained from decades of boot traffic, but solid and beautiful once he sanded and sealed it. Ida brought in furniture from Birch Street, a sofa that had been in their family for 20 years, Walt's recliner, a bookshelf filled with Ida's cookbooks and Walt's plumbing manuals, and the complete works of Louis L'Amour, which Walt had been reading since he was 15. The tall windows that looked over Main Street became Ida's favorite thing about the building. She placed her sewing chair next to the east window, where the morning sun came in strong and warm, and she could sit and watch the town wake up below, the same town that had been whispering about them at Dottie's Diner. By March, 3 weeks after they'd moved in, the upstairs of Station Number 4 was a home. Not a fancy home, not a magazine home, a real home, the kind that smells like coffee in the morning and laundry soap in the afternoon, and whatever Ida was cooking in the evening. A home that worked because it was built by someone who understood how things work, and filled by someone who understood how people work. But the downstairs, the 3-bay garage, that was where Walt's real plan lived. Everything was about to change for Crandall, but Walt and Ida had something that nobody else in that town had, and it wasn't money. It was 48 years of knowing exactly how buildings breathe, and 31 years of knowing exactly how people hunger, and the two of them together were about to prove that the only thing more powerful than youth and money is experience and love. Bay 1 became Walt's workshop. He set up his plumbing tools, his workbench, his parts inventory, the accumulated equipment of half a century of trade work, organized on pegboard walls and metal shelving with the precision of a surgical suite. He hung a sign above the rolling door: Purcell Plumbing, open Saturdays, fair prices, not a new business. The same business he'd run for 48 years, now operating from a building with more workspace than he'd ever had. Bay 2 became Ida's project. She didn't tell Walt what she was planning. She measured the space, drew diagrams on graph paper at the kitchen table, made lists in a notebook she kept in her apron pocket. Then she drove to the restaurant supply store in Mansfield and spent $2,200 on stainless steel prep tables, a commercial refrigerator, storage racks, and serving equipment. When Walt asked what she was doing, she said, "Feeding people." Bay 3 stayed empty. "For now," Walt said, when Ida asked about it. "Something will need that space eventually. Something always does." Ida's community kitchen opened on a Saturday in April. She didn't advertise. She didn't make announcements. She simply opened the rolling door of Bay 2, set up a folding table with a handwritten sign that said, "Free lunch, everyone welcome," and started cooking. She made chili, 3 enormous pots of it, using her school cafeteria recipe scaled up, the recipe that 130,000 children had eaten over 31 years. She made cornbread in cast-iron skillets. She set out butter and honey and paper napkins and mismatched bowls she'd collected from thrift stores over the preceding weeks. The first person through the door was Harley Voss, a 62-year-old man who'd been living in his car since his wife died, and his disability check stopped covering rent. Harley hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal in 7 months. He sat at Ida's folding table and ate 2 bowls of chili and 3 pieces of cornbread and cried into a paper napkin while Ida pretended not to notice, because she'd spent 31 years feeding children who were ashamed of being hungry, and she knew that the kindest thing you can do for someone in that position is act like everything is normal. By noon, there were 14 people in Bay 2. By the second Saturday, 23. By the fourth Saturday, 40. Word traveled the way it always travels in small towns, not through announcements, but through need. The people who came were the people Crandall had stopped seeing: the elderly on fixed incomes, the families between paychecks, the single mothers working 2 jobs, the veterans who'd fallen through the gaps, the teenagers whose home situations were bad enough that a free bowl of chili in a firehouse felt like sanctuary. Ida fed them all. She cooked Tuesday and Thursday evenings and Saturday lunch. She never asked for money. She never asked for names. She never asked why someone needed a meal, because the answer was always the same, and asking the question served nobody except the asker. The money came from Walt's plumbing work, which had picked up considerably since he'd reopened from the firehouse. Turns out, the people of Crandall still had pipes that leaked and toilets that ran, and they'd been paying $85 an hour to a company from Mansfield since Walt retired. Now Walt was back, charging $45, and his phone rang constantly. He worked Monday through Friday and brought home $800 to $1,200 a week, which more than covered their minimal living expenses and funded Ida's kitchen. Then something unexpected happened. People started donating, not money at first, food. A farmer named Ed Stoltz showed up one Tuesday with 50 pounds of potatoes in the back of his truck. "Wife says we got more than we can eat," he said, which was his way of helping without admitting he was helping. A woman named Maria, who ran the Mexican grocery on Oak Street, started bringing cases of beans and rice every week. The manager at the Kroger in Mount Gilead began setting aside day-old bread and produce that was still perfectly good but couldn't be sold. Ida accepted everything with the same quiet gratitude she'd shown in the school cafeteria when the budget was cut, and she had to make 400 lunches from whatever the district sent her. Then money started arriving. Cash in envelopes slipped under the rolling door. Checks mailed to the Firehouse Kitchen, Station Number 4, Crandall, Ohio. A $500 anonymous donation in a card that said simply, "Thank you for feeding my mother." Within 6 months, Ida's community kitchen had a dedicated fund of $14,000, enough to operate for a year without any other income. The town stopped laughing. Not all at once, not with apologies or grand gestures. Just gradually, the way weather changes, the whispers at Dottie's shifted from mockery to curiosity to something that looked, if you squinted, like respect. Frank Teller, who'd called the purchase a money pit, showed up one Saturday with his grandson. They ate chili. Frank left $20 on the table and didn't say a word. The woman who'd predicted Ida would fall down the stairs brought a casserole. People who had never spoken to Walt and Ida beyond a nod on the street started stopping by to see what was happening inside the old firehouse, and what they found confused them, because it looked nothing like what they'd expected and everything like what the town had needed for years. That was the moment the whole town understood what Walt and Ida had known all along, that the people they'd dismissed as too old, too stubborn, too unreasonable to accept help were actually the ones holding the town together, and they'd been doing it their entire lives. The only thing that changed was the address. Gary drove down from Dayton on a Sunday in May, 5 months after his parents had moved into the firehouse. He came alone, without Sandra and Kevin, without a plan, without talking points from a group text. He parked his Audi in front of Station Number 4 and sat in the car for 10 minutes, looking at the building. The 3 rolling doors were open. In Bay 1 he could see Walt's workshop, neat and organized, a customer's sink sitting on the workbench mid-repair. In Bay 2 the community kitchen was being cleaned after Saturday lunch, the stainless steel gleaming, Ida's handwritten menu still on the board, chicken soup, biscuits, apple crisp. In Bay 3, which was no longer empty, a group of teenagers was sitting in a circle of folding chairs, talking to a woman Gary didn't recognize. He'd learn later that Bay 3 had become a tutoring center. A retired teacher named Dorothy Klein had approached Ida about using the space 3 afternoons a week for after-school homework help. Ida had said yes in 4 seconds. Gary walked inside and found his father under a sink. "Dad." Walt slid out from under the cabinet, a wrench in his hand, his glasses slightly crooked. He was thinner than Gary remembered, more weathered, his hands stained with pipe dope and plumber's putty, but his eyes were clear. Clearer, actually, than they'd been in years. The clouded, resigned look of a man being managed had been replaced by something sharper. Purpose. "Hey, son." "I came to see the place." "You're looking at it?" Gary walked through the building the way David had walked through the mountain cabin in the story before this one, the way all children walk through the lives their parents build after being told they can't build anything, slowly, with increasing disbelief, touching things as if testing whether they were real. The workshop, the kitchen, the tutoring center, the apartment upstairs, warm and neat and smelling of fresh bread. The tall windows with Ida's sewing chair, the pale blue bedroom Walt had built, the hardwood floors he'd uncovered and refinished. A building that 5 years of emptiness had turned into a problem, and 5 months of Walt and Ida had turned into the most important address in Crandall. "How much did all this cost?" Gary asked, because Gary was an accountant, and cost was how he understood the world. "About $14,000 in materials for the renovation. Ida's kitchen runs on donations now. My plumbing pays the utilities, and then some." Gary did the math. His parents had bought the building for $58,500 and renovated it for $14,000. Total investment, $72,500. The Sunrise Meadows plan would have cost $139,200 per year, indefinitely, funded by selling the Birch Street house. His parents had bought their freedom for half the cost of a single year in a facility. "I owe you an apology," Gary said. "You owe me a visit," Walt said. The apology was always optional. Ida came downstairs with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Gary. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say anything about Sunrise Meadows, or the deposit he'd taken from their savings, or the letter that had arrived on a Monday in January. She just handed her son a cup of coffee and said, "Are you hungry? I made soup." Gary stayed for 3 hours. He ate 2 bowls of soup. He watched his father fix a sink with the same hands that had fixed everything in his childhood, and would, apparently, keep fixing things until those hands, physically, could not close around a wrench. He watched his mother clean the kitchen with the efficiency of a woman who had cleaned 4,000 kitchens, and could do it in her sleep, and would keep doing it because stopping would mean stopping being herself. When he left, he sat in his Audi for another 10 minutes. This time he wasn't confused. He was ashamed. Sandra came the following weekend. She brought her daughter, who was 22, and had just finished nursing school. Sandra cried when she saw the kitchen. Her daughter signed up to volunteer on Tuesday evenings. Kevin came a month later. He didn't cry, but he stayed for the entire Saturday lunch service, washing dishes in the 3-compartment sink for 4 hours without complaining, which was the longest Kevin had done anything with his hands since he was 18. None of them mentioned Pine Ridge. None of them mentioned Sunrise Meadows. The deposit, it turned out, had been refunded when Walt canceled the reservation. Gary had quietly returned the $3,000 to his parents' savings account without saying a word. Some apologies are better made in silence. Station number 4 stands today on the corner of Birch and Main in Crandall, Ohio. The 3 rolling doors are open most days, weather permitting. Bay 1 is Purcell Plumbing, where Walt, at 77, still works 4 days a week, still charges $45 an hour, still shows up when he says he will. Bay 2 is the Firehouse Kitchen, where Ida, at 75, serves free meals 3 times a week to anyone who walks through the door. No questions asked. Bay 3 is the Crandall Community Room, home to the tutoring program, a weekly seniors' coffee morning, a monthly blood pressure clinic run by Sandra's daughter, and a Friday evening gathering that started with 6 people and now regularly draws 30. Upstairs, in the apartment that Walt built with plumber's hands and a plumber's patience, Ida keeps her sewing chair by the east window and watches the town wake up every morning. The pale blue bedroom is warm in winter and cool in summer. The hardwood floors glow in the afternoon light. The kitchen smells like whatever Ida made that day, which is always something good because Ida Purcell has never made anything that wasn't. On the wall of Bay 2, next to the menu board, Ida has hung a framed copy of the Sunrise Meadows letter, the cream-colored paper, the gold logo, the $11,600 monthly rate. She hung it there not as revenge but as a reminder that the world looks at elderly people and sees cost, sees burden, sees decline. And sometimes, if the elderly people are brave enough and stubborn enough and in love enough, the world turns out to be wrong about all of it. My heart overflows with gratitude that you stayed with Walt and Ida through every moment of their extraordinary journey. From the letter on the kitchen table to the chili in the firehouse, from the town that laughed to the town that lined up with bowls in their hands, from the children who planned a nursing home to the son who washed dishes for 4 hours in silence because he finally understood what his parents had been trying to teach him his entire life. If their story touched something deep inside you, if you've ever been managed by people who couldn't manage themselves, if you've ever been told the building is condemned when really it just needed someone who knew what they were doing, if you've ever served a meal to someone who needed it and watched them come back to life one spoonful at a time, then leave just one word in the comments, one word that describes the feeling of being useful when the world has decided you're used up, because Walt and Ida's story proves something that no balance sheet can calculate and no conference call can capture, that the most sustainable thing in the world is a person with purpose, that feeding people is the oldest and most powerful form of love, that a fire station isn't just a building, it's whatever the people inside it make it, that the hands that built your childhood bathroom and packed your school lunch are the same hands that will rebuild a community if you get out of the way and let them, and that the most expensive mistake you can ever make is looking at 2 people who've been holding the world together for 50 years and deciding they're a burden. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that their hands still have work left in them, that their kitchen still has meals left to serve, that the abandoned building on the corner might be exactly where they're supposed to be, because together we prove that hearts don't rust, that strong hands never lose their purpose, and that sometimes the greatest home is the one everyone else gave up on. If this story stayed with you, subscribe for more. We'll see you in the next one.